The train shrieked like some wounded beast before it stilled, sighing steam across the cracked boards of the little prairie station. Dust lifted from a platform and drifted about the figure of a young woman sitting alone on the far bench, her gloved hands folded around a small brown suitcase, the brim of her bonnet tilted low as though to shield her from the gaze of every stranger who came and went. The iron wheels ground to a halt, doors swung wide, and voices swelled with greetings, reunions, departures. None of it touched her. For 3 days, trains had come and gone, and she remained where she was, her back straight despite the weight in her chest, her eyes fixed on the horizon as though the person she waited for might still appear out of the rising haze. But no one came. The station itself seemed to grow suspicious of her. By the second evening, Mrs. Ruth Abernathy, who managed the depot alongside her husband, had made it her business to ask whether Clara May Hensley had mistaken the place for a boarding house. Clara had lifted her chin, offered the briefest of polite smiles, and said no, she was waiting for someone who was due to arrive. The woman had sniffed, lips pressed tight, but said nothing further. That silence was worse than scolding. It implied judgment that never had to be spoken aloud. And it followed Clara into the night when she curled beneath her shawl and listened to the owls calling in the cottonwoods. Was she truly waiting for someone who would never come? On the third morning the air was already heavy with dust and the faint sharpness of coal smoke, and Clara's body was weary in ways she did not want to admit. She had eaten nothing more than scraps, bread offered by a kindly porter, a bruised apple bought with the last coin she could spare, and her stomach twisted with hunger. But hunger was nothing beside the deeper shame blooming inside her. With every hour she lingered, more eyes noticed. Men in rough coats chuckled about the girl abandoned at the station, calling her the bride left on the platform. 2 young women in pressed calico dresses whispered and stared, their laughter feathered but cutting. Clara folded herself smaller, though her pride urged her to lift her head, which would betray her more, pretending she did not care, or admitting how much it hurt. She reached into her satchel and unfolded the crumpled paper she had read a dozen times already. The letter was inked in a hand she had once thought steady. Meet me at Ashford Station 3 days after your train. I will be there, and we will start anew. His words, once bright with promise, now seemed to fade each time her eyes passed over them. Perhaps he had never intended to come. Perhaps the letter itself had been a final act of cruelty, sending her westward with nothing to greet her but silence. What sort of man bound a woman's hope with ink, then vanished before she arrived? And yet Clara stayed. Was it stubbornness? Hope? Or something nameless she could not abandon? Each passing train rattled her bones with temptation. Leave, flee back east, disappear into some other town where no one knew her shame. But each time the doors clanged open, she lifted her gaze, heart thrumming with foolish belief that he might yet appear from the smoke, hand raised in recognition. That was when she saw the boy. He appeared near noon, wandering along the edge of the platform with a stick dragging through the dust. His boots were too large, clumsy on his small feet, and his hat sat crooked on his head, as though borrowed from a man. He watched her from a short distance, eyes curious and unashamed. Children did not hide their interest the way adults did. They had no need for whispered cruelty. Their questions were spoken aloud. Clara managed a smile, though her lips trembled with weariness. "What's your name?" she asked gently, her voice hoarse from disuse. The boy studied her, then tapped his stick against the boards. "Sammy," he said. "Sammy Carter." She nodded, tasting the name as though it carried some secret she did not yet know. "Do you live near here, Sammy?" He shrugged, then scuffed his boots. "Papa's ranch, out past the river." His gaze lingered on her face with something startling in its openness. Then he tilted his head and spoke words that struck her like a hammer swung without warning. "You look like Mama would have if she'd stayed. Will you marry my father instead?" The platform stilled around her. A man unloading sacks of grain paused mid-gesture, his mouth ajar. 2 women by the ticket booth pressed their hands to their lips and giggled. Heat rushed to Clara's cheeks. She opened her mouth, closed it again, her mind scattering like startled birds. What kind of child spoke so? What grief hid beneath such innocence? She glanced beyond the boy and saw him, standing at the far end of the platform, half in shadow. A tall man in worn ranch clothes, shoulders broad beneath a faded coat, hat brim low, watching with an unreadable face. He did not move toward them nor away. His stillness carried a weight heavier than words. Clara's breath caught. Was this a cruel jest? A boy's careless fancy? Or had Providence itself seen her waiting 3 long days and sent this small figure to shatter her despair? The boy, Sammy, waited, eyes wide, expecting an answer. Clara bent slowly, her skirts brushing the dust, and laid a trembling hand on his shoulder. "Your father," she began, unsure what to say, unsure how to soften the blow of reality. But the words withered when she saw the man finally step forward, moving with the deliberate pace of someone who did not want to approach, yet could not stay away. Eli Carter's eyes were downcast as he reached them, his hat turning in his weathered hands. His face was marked by sun and years, a beard shadowing his jaw, his expression grave yet not unkind. He cleared his throat and gave the slightest nod. "Beg your pardon, miss." "The boy, he speaks out of turn." Clara shook her head, though her heart still raced. He meant no harm. The townsfolk nearby leaned closer, drinking in the scene. Clara felt their judgment heavier than the hot air pressing on her. Eli's presence only deepened the tension. Who was he, this man whose silence spoke louder than all their whispers? Sammy looked between them, his little face caught between defiance and hope. "She's been waiting, Papa. 3 days. Nobody came. Why can't she come with us?" Eli's jaw tightened. He placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, steady but not harsh. "That's enough, son." His voice was deep, controlled, yet Clara heard the strain beneath it. The boy obeyed reluctantly, though his eyes lingered on her, wide and pleading. Clara rose, her composure fragile. She met Eli's gaze for the briefest of moments and saw something unexpected, sorrow, unspoken and unhealed. He turned away quickly, as though afraid to let her see too much. "Forgive us," he murmured, guiding Sammy a step aside. "We'll trouble you no more." But Clara's heart, already bruised by days of waiting, could not let it end so easily. She called softly, "Wait." The words slipped from her before she could think. Both father and son paused, and for a breathless instant, she felt the weight of choice pressing upon her. Should she remain silent, continue waiting for a promise broken, or step toward this stranger fate had set in her path? The moment dissolved when Mrs. Abernathy bustled forward, her sharp voice breaking the stillness. "Miss Hensley, the evening train is near due. If you're not boarding, you best step aside. You're holding yourself in shame." Shame. The word struck like a whip. Clara clutched her suitcase tighter, though she had nowhere to go. The boy tugged at his father's hand, whispering words too low to catch, but his eyes still searched hers with stubborn hope. When the train roared in at dusk, Clara did not rise. Passengers streamed past, tickets in hand, the smell of coal thick in the air. Eli lingered at a distance, as if torn between leaving and staying. Sammy broke free and darted back to her side, pressing something small into her hand, a piece of cornbread, wrapped clumsily in cloth. "You can't keep waiting forever," he said simply. Clara looked down at the bread, then back at the boy. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Maybe I've waited long enough, but not for a train." And in that instant, Eli lifted his eyes to hers for the first time. In them was no laughter, no cruelty, only a haunted searching, as though he too had been waiting longer than he dared admit. The lantern above flickered, casting its fragile glow over 3 figures on the platform, the weary woman, the silent man, the hopeful child. The train whistled, steam curling skyward, yet none of them moved. The question lingered, heavy as the night settling in. Was this chance or destiny pressing its hand against their lives? The night after the train screamed and rolled away, Clara found herself riding in a wagon with the Carters. She had not planned it, had not spoken agreement aloud, yet there she sat with her suitcase at her feet and her shawl drawn tight, the boy curled against her side, half asleep, the father holding the reins with quiet concentration. The moon washed the prairie silver. Grass moved in slow waves as though the land itself breathed. Clara's mind whispered questions without end. Why had she not boarded? What force kept her here beside strangers? And what kind of man would take in a woman with no story offered, no promise made? Eli Carter said little. His shoulders were squared, his profile solemn, as though silence was safer than words. But the boy filled the darkness with small chatter, pointing out a lightning bug, a coyote's call, the crooked shape of the moon. Each word fell like a stone into the still water between her and his father. She found herself answering softly, her voice easing into the space, and each time she did, she noticed Eli's hands twitch faintly on the reins, as though he heard more than he let on. When they reached the ranch, Dawn was bleeding across the horizon, pink light touching the broken fence rails and sagging porch. The place bore the weary mark of being kept alive by one man's back. The corral was half mended. A stack of uncut logs leaned against the barn, and the windows of the house carried a dim, neglected air. Still, it was a place with bones and soul, rough-hewn but steady. Clara stepped down, her boots sinking into the dirt, and felt the strange stir of belonging, though she had no claim here. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke, leather, and old bread. The table bore scars of 100 meals, though it was now cluttered with tools and scraps. Sammy, without hesitation, dragged a chair close to her and demanded she sit. Eli, his hat still in hand, stood near the doorway as if uncertain whether to offer her welcome or warning. "It's not much," he said at last, voice low, "but it holds." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She set her suitcase down by the chair and folded her hands, trying not to tremble under the weight of being seen. "It's more than I expected." Sammy laughed as though he understood her hidden meaning. He darted off, returning with a chipped mug of water he pressed into her hands like a gift. She drank gratefully, though the silence that followed was heavy. She wondered how long she could stay before Eli asked her to leave. Days unfolded with the rhythm of labor. Clara began by mending what her hands found. A torn curtain, a button missing from Sammy's shirt, a seam unraveling at the hem of Eli's sleeve. She did not announce these acts. She simply worked with needle and thread while the men busied themselves outdoors. Yet she noticed Eli watching, his gaze lingering before he turned away. Each small repair stitched her into the fabric of their days, though she did not know if she was welcome or merely tolerated. Sammy was relentless in his affection. He followed her through the house, asked endless questions, leaned against her as if he had known her his whole life. He pressed flowers into her palm, rocks he swore were special, bits of twine he thought useful. His presence filled the quiet with warmth, and Clara's heart, long hollow, began to beat differently. She caught herself humming as she swept the floor, a tune she had not sung since girlhood, and when she looked up, Eli stood in the doorway listening, the knife in his hand paused mid-whittling. He did not speak, but something in his stillness told her he heard every note. Yet not all was tender. Word of her presence spread quickly into town. When Clara accompanied Eli and Sammy to the mercantile, whispers followed her down the aisles. Women eyed her with disdain, men with curiosity too sharp to be kind. Ruth Abernathy made a show of tightening her lips and muttering within earshot, "Some names cannot be washed once stained." The words burned hot in Clara's chest, though she smiled tightly and kept her head high. Later, back at the ranch, she wept into her shawl while the wind rattled the shutters. The shame of being unchosen, unwanted, and now gossiped overcut deeper than she thought she could bear. But Sammy's arm slipped around her waist, his voice muffled against her dress. "Don't cry, Mama." The word startled her. Mama. He spoke it as though it belonged to her, as though her place was already set at his side. She held him close, tears wetting his hair, torn between fear of false hope and the longing to believe him. Eli saw the traces of her tears when he returned from the barn. He said nothing at first, merely poured himself a cup of water. Then, in a voice rough as gravel, he offered, "People talk. Always will. But talk don't raise a boy." His eyes flicked toward her, then away. She heard the unspoken truth. He was asking her to endure, to bear the weight of being seen as something improper, because the boy needed her more than the town's opinion mattered. Clara studied him, seeing the lines at his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the loneliness etched into every movement. He had not asked her to stay, but he had not told her to leave either. And in his silence, she began to hear a different question. Could he allow himself to hope again? One storm-heavy night the sky split open, rain thrashing the roof, thunder rolling over the plains. Lightning lit the room in brief, violent flashes. Sammy woke crying, rushing into her arms. She held him, rocking gently, whispering lullabies her mother once sang. Eli entered, soaked from securing the animals, his hair plastered to his brow, his eyes filled with something rawer than she had ever seen. He stopped when he saw her with the boy, their heads bent close, her hand stroking the child's hair, as if she had always belonged in that place. In that moment, something inside him broke open. He stepped closer, voice low and shaking. "My boy asked you what I couldn't. I feared replacing what's gone. Thought it dishonored her memory. But watching you now," his words faltered. He raked a hand through his wet hair, breath unsteady. "Maybe it's not about replacing. Maybe it's about letting ourselves breathe again. Clara's heart hammered. She shifted Sammy gently, laying him down as the storm raged beyond the walls. Her own voice trembled, yet steadied with resolve. I am not her. I cannot be. But I can be myself. And I can stand beside you if you let me. Thunder shook the house. Eli moved closer still, so close she could see the droplets clinging to his lashes. His hand, rough and scarred, hovered near hers before finally resting atop it. For the first time, his silence broke not with words, but with presence. He held her gaze, and in that gaze she saw the fragile seed of trust of a new beginning. The storm subsided by dawn. Sammy awoke, blinking at the two of them sitting near, their hands still joined. He smiled a smile too wide for his small face and declared, then it settled. She's Mama now. Neither Eli nor Clara corrected him. Weeks passed, and the ranch began to change. Flowers sprouted in the yard where Clara planted seeds. Shirts hung with buttons mended. The empty rocking chair on the porch creaked again under her weight in the evenings as she watched Eli and Sammy in the yard, the boy chasing fireflies, the father's eyes softer than she had yet seen. The gossip in town did not cease, but dulled against the louder truth blooming within their walls. One evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, Eli set down his tools and walked toward her where she sat on the porch. He looked at her a long moment, then said simply, "Stay." The word was not request nor command, but something steadier. It was a vow waiting to be answered. Clara felt the weight of her long wait at the station, the wasted days, the shame endured. She felt also the warmth of the boy's hand in hers, the strength of the man's quiet presence, the way her heart no longer feared stillness. She smiled, tears catching the last of the light. I already have. And as the prairie wind carried the smell of grass and wood smoke across the land, Clara knew the waiting had not been in vain. She had thought she waited for a man who never came, but perhaps she had been waiting for the place where she truly belonged, for the people who would see her not as abandoned, but as found. Sometimes the heart waits at stations for promises that never arrive. But other times the waiting is only to teach us how to recognize the moment when grace finally does.